Hey, welcome back to Global Environment. We're going to talk about fuel resources today, and mainly fossil fuels. But to really look at this in the proper context, let's think about these statistics here. It takes about a gallon a day in oil equivalents to feed the average American. So what does that really mean? If you had a bagel this morning, the grain for that bagel had to be grown out west someplace using fossil fuel-derived pesticides, fossil fuel-derived fertilizers, fossil fuel-derived irrigation, basically. And it had to be harvested using fossil fuels, shipped across the country using fossil fuels, processed using fossil fuels, and cooked using fossil fuels. That's where that energy comes from. Now, overall, it takes about 10 gallons a day to take care of you. We're little energy swine. So besides the food, you think about the clothes you're wearing. They were made using fossil fuels. They're probably made out of fossil fuels. This room that I'm working in, the room you're sitting in, fossil fuel derived energy that's driving everything. The materials that are made out of fossil fuels. We use a lot of energy. Now let's look at GNP versus energy use. So basically our way of life, our economic growth, and you can see it here in this slide. This is time over here, and this is GNP for the U.S. economy. So GNP, gross national product, you can see over time it's been rising. And it's interesting, basically in a way that reminds us of exponential growth. And if you think about it, we want 3, 4, 5, 6% growth in the economy. That's exponential growth. Now look what's going up with it. Fuel energy use. Look at this. This one goes down, this one goes down. This one goes up, this one goes up. Down, down, up, up. They match very well together. And that's what you see up here, how well they go up and down together. Now, what does that mean? What are we talking about when we say fuel energy use? We're talking about mainly fossil fuels. And one interpretation of this graph, which is probably the most correct one, is our economy is very dependent on fossil fuels. Okay? So think of it, your way of life going up exponentially. And how about the quantity of fossil fuels in the ground? That's going down. So do you see a problem here? I hope so. All right, so we are very dependent on fossil fuel energy for our way of life. Okay, so look at this. Energy use increases personal income. And you can see over time in the U.S., here's time again, GDP rising, we mentioned that, and GDP per capita is actually the more important metric because it's how much wealth per person. And you can see that has been rising. Now, also, as you'd expect, our use of energy has been rising over time. And also, our energy mix has been changing quite a bit. You can see in the 1800s, we were mostly dependent on wood. Then we got into coal, then oil, natural gas, now nuclear and hydro also make up a percentage of that. And that's important because that feeds into the idea of quality of energy. So energy is measured in things like joules and calories, but all energy isn't created equal, especially for the economy. And if you think of types of energy that are useful for the economy, if I give you a chunk of coal, there's not a lot you can do with that just by itself. But if I give you some electricity for our economy, you can do all kinds of things. So generally, we're trying to change types of energy into other types that are of higher quality and more useful. Now, if you look at oil, if we want to use that in the economy, we might turn it into electricity. Okay, fine. But about 2/3 of that energy is lost in that conversion. Again, the second law of thermodynamics that we talked about. We lose that in heating up our sink. So again, a joule isn't equal to a joule when it comes to the economy. All right, so again, joules, calories, we lose a lot of that energy, often up the smokestack. And you can see our quality changing over time in this graph, which which shows energy use as a percentage over time for the U.S. economy. Again, physical labor, domesticated animals, very important in the early years. Now it's all mainly about fossil fuels. So our energy mix, the quality of it, is increasing. And, you know, energy has always been important, And before fossil fuels, we used a lot of wood energy. And you can see in this map here, this is Central Europe, the amount of deforestation that has occurred over time. And again, those economies here, much of it's Germany, relied on wood. And it's interesting because this is different than fossil fuels in that it's basically a renewable resource, but we didn't use it like that. We mined wood, and there are other examples of us mining renewable resources like fish. That's really a problem. So look at this graph. This shows over time GDP rising again and energy. Now, a lot of people have made a big deal about what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years when it comes to energy use and GDP. You see how it's kind of diverged here, and a lot of people have pointed this out and said, look, we're becoming more efficient. We don't rely on energy as much because they're not tracking together. But this is really kind of an artifact of some other policies that have occurred. Okay, what's going on? Why is the economy growing a bit faster than fuel use? One is that idea of higher quality of energy. You get more bang for the buck. Here we're just looking at joules or calories. But in this case, it doesn't quite make sense because as we move to higher quality energy, we get more bang for the buck. And we can do that as long as those higher quality energy resources remain, which might not be the case. Another reason we see this is that production that's very energy intensive is often moved overseas. For example, we're making steel in Korea instead of places like Buffalo, New York now. So that energy is off our accounting books, basically. We're refining petroleum places like Mexico and Venezuela instead of the U.S. So that is outside the book, so it makes it appear that we're becoming more efficient. Another reason is during the 70s and 80s, people started turning down their thermostats to save money. Now that had really no influence on the efficiency of our production, but it did change our accounting. So these three reasons are really why we see that divergence. The efficiency is really overrated. Okay, so we're going to stop right there, and we're going to look more at energy and wealth in the next segment. So I'll see you next time in Global Environment.